Okay, look, we'll start with refuge and bodhicitta. Like last week I talked about when we go for refuge, where, we usually take refuge in a lot of worldly things to try and make us feel happy, but it's not necessarily working for us, and so we sort of come to meditate, to learn a bit more about our minds and to find a bit of peace. And so we're in a Tibetan Buddhist centre, so we look towards the Buddha as an example of someone who's purified his mind and made himself, he found perfect peace and then taught it to others. So it's not theistic. It's not like Buddha is God. I've got friends of mine who say, I say I don't necessarily believe in God, and that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with believing in God, but they go, but you believe in the Buddha. But it's not like that. It's the Buddha taught others how to find peace and happiness themselves. So he was a teacher, and other people can achieve what he achieved. So it's a bit different. So anyway, we'll take refuge, and some people know the prayer and some people just listen in. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma and the highest assembly. From the virtuous merit that I collect by practicing giving and the other perfections, may I attain the state of a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So last week I talked about the refuge prayer and how we go for refuge. I mean, you can go for refuge in anyone that inspires you, really. You turn your mind, you think about them. I often think of people like Nelson Mandela or Jesus even, who, they led inspiring lives and can help us. They were people, they were human, and so we can learn that we also can be that good if we try. Also, just to finish the story of the Buddha, last week I talked about how he was a prince and he left the palace and saw a sick person, an old person, and a corpse in the street, and was quite shocked because he'd been quite protected from the messy world outside, and then because he had a lot of compassion, he was just a naturally compassionate and caring person, and was sort of really shocked and wanted to know, why do people suffer, why do they grow old, and why do they die, and he started studying the Hindu texts. He also married, and his wife studied alongside of him, and she was extremely compassionate as well, and eventually he realised that because of his attachments in the palace and to his family, he had a son, that he needed to go off and he left his family. And this isn't advertising, leave your family, to go and be enlightened, and then you'll get rid of all your problems. It doesn't work that way. Because he understood so deeply, and he studied the texts, and he actually moved on from the Hindu because it wasn't, he still was suffering, even though he would go into deep blissful states of concentration and meditation. When he came out of those states, he was again suffering, so that he was still questioning, why do we suffer, and why do we need to suffer? And that's when he went off on his own and finally became enlightened under the Bodhi tree, and then his friends who he'd sort of left and were upset with him saw him, and because he didn't sort of go out proselytising about it or talking about it until people asked him, what is it that you're doing, or how have you, you look pretty peaceful and happy, what are you doing? And so then he started teaching. So also, his wife became enlightened and his son became enlightened as well. So he hadn't forgotten them. It was because he loved them so much that was one of the reasons that motivated him, because they were suffering as, they were suffering beings as well, and that he couldn't bear anybody to be suffering. So the whole purpose of the whole way to become enlightened is to understand that everybody is suffering, and that it's not just oneself, and that by freeing oneself, then you're able to kind of teach like he taught and help others. The Buddha can't take away our suffering. He can't sort of lay on hands and say, "Oh, you're free of suffering." He can't do that. He can teach you how to do it yourself. So he began to teach, and he taught what was called they refer to it as the first turning of the wheel. So the first thing he taught to his 5 disciples, his 5 friends, was that the 4 Noble Truths, which is what we started talking about last week. And the 4 Noble Truths being, I'm just sort of going over this for anyone who wasn't here last week, so sorry if you're hearing it again. The 4 Noble Truths are, the first one is that the truth of suffering, that suffering exists, and there are 3 types of suffering. The suffering of suffering, which is our normal... Sorry, did you have your hand up? Oh. Normal physical and mental suffering that we acknowledge as suffering. We recognise it as suffering. And then there's the suffering of change, which is often things that we think are going to make us happy, or, we achieve something and then somehow it disappoints us, or it's not satisfactory, or it's not what we thought it was going to be, or there's all sorts of ways, and death eventually, imparting, so that even if you have a really wonderful, perfect relationship, it will have to end, so that it can never be entirely satisfying. So that's called the suffering of change. So things that we normally see as a source of happiness change into a source of suffering. It's like if you go to the beach on a hot day and you're really hot and you're walking across the sand and it's unbearable, and then you go in the water and you go, "Oh, bliss, beautiful, it's really nice." But if you stay in the water, you'll start to get cold. And then if you continue to stay in the water, you get really, really cold and very uncomfortable. So that initial happiness is turned into the suffering of cold, and then you come out of the water and then you experience the suffering of heat again. So it's never... and the first moment of, say, coming out of the water, you're cold and you're in the sun and it's like, "Oh, now I'm nice and warm," and it feels really good. And it does feel really good when you come out on a hot day of the cold water. You feel quite refreshed. But that first moment is the beginning of the suffering of heat again, and it grows and grows. So that there's never a moment where you're actually satisfied, because it's constantly changing. That's the suffering of change. And then there's all pervasive suffering. So just by virtue of having this body that suffers and a mind that suffers, we will suffer. It's just all pervasive. There's no kind of getting away from it. And that's just being really honest. We'd like to... I sound like I'm banging on about suffering, but if we're really honest with ourselves, this is our sort of constant state, fluctuating from one thing to another. And we have moments of joy and peace, but they don't last very long, and we move into something else. So that the truth of suffering. And the second noble truth is the truth of the cause of suffering. And I'm sort of going to talk a bit about that, or more about how to deal with it. The causes of suffering are our delusions. So fundamental ignorance is the main delusion. It's just that we grasp onto things. We grasp onto things as if they're solid and real and they're going to last forever. And then of course we will be let down. Of course things go wrong. Of course things break. Of course things grow old. But we're grasping onto them as if they're kind of, this is the source of my happiness. And it's unrealistic. So from that sort of grasping, we grasp at things that we think will give us pleasure and form attachments for objects, cars, people, whatever. And that attachment then gives us a distorted view of that object, saying this is the most beautiful, fabulous car on earth, like a Tesla. So, if I had a choice, I would buy a Tesla because it's environmentally sound. And actually, I can't think of anything wrong with that. But it's going to break down. It's going to get old. It's going to fall apart. It's going to cost a lot of money in the first place. So, hopefully they can bring the prices down on these things. But it will ultimately, it's not the source of my ultimate happiness. I might think driving this feels really cool, but as soon as I'm in traffic or someone's annoying me, then, or if I crash it, if it gets damaged, I'll be devastated, or, I have to pay a fortune to get it fixed. There's all sorts of things that can go wrong. And it will get old and dated and maybe run out of electricity halfway between somewhere and I have to get it towed or something. It's not the ultimate source of my happiness. But so what I've done is, say with a car, like I suppose like people sort of think a black Mercedes, fantastic, and you have this whole vision of the whole lifestyle that comes with the car, and you just feel so fabulous driving in your expensive, wonderful car, it's really cool to drive in expensive, wonderful cars. It does feel nice. But you've created a whole sort of exaggerated picture of this car and you attach yourself. So the Tesla, I think I'm the most fantastic environmentally sound person on earth and I'm so good because I drive this car. So I've sort of exaggerated the car to this sort of high status, and those feelings that I get create a sort of real attachment, and ego are involved in the things that we own and possess. And so we've created this whole world around something that's just a lump of metal with some tyres on it, and we've created this whole image of ourselves attached to this object. And then that image, we hang on to that too. We see that as real and solid and special and important. And as soon as that's challenged, then we get angry. So as soon as someone challenges our special view of ourselves or our right to kind of the promotion or in traffic, we get upset and we get angry because this sort of picture of ourselves as being important because we are the centre of our own universe is challenged, and we get angry. Or when we don't get something that we want, we get angry. I knew someone actually once who I worked with him. He bought this car that he couldn't really afford, and he took out a loan, and then he demanded that the boss give him a raise so that he could afford to pay the loan off. And I said to him, why didn't you, what did you buy it for in the first place? If you can't afford it, why on earth did you buy it? Now you've caused yourself this huge nightmare because he's got this loan that he can't afford to pay, and his life has become really difficult because financially for this silly car. And he said, because it feels good. He likes to drive it, so he's kind of, dare I say it, male ego was sort of caught up with this car that caused an enormous problem in his life. I could talk about his other things that went wrong too. So many bad choices. So it's because we grasp onto these things as real. That's the bottom line, is where we're kind of going wrong. And then we create all of this, the rest of our suffering is because of that. So that the third noble truth is called the truth of cessation. So cessation is stopping doing this grasping. If we could actually get a more realistic view of what's going on, what exists, how things exist in reality, we would do less grasping. We would have less attachment, we'd have less anger, we'd have less fear, we'd have less anxiety, we'd have less depression. All of those things would sort of lessen. Not to say, that they won't occur, but we'll view them differently. We won't be grasping onto those things as much. And that's peace. We don't have peace because we're worried about stuff. We're worried about our attachments. We're worried about the things that upset us and the people that upset us, and all the different things, the myriad of things that we worry about. And that's what's going on in our crazy minds. If we can lessen that and free ourselves a bit from that, it feels good. And that's peace. That's kind of all that we're doing, is just trying to lessen this kind of crazy chatter that's grasping at things eternally and will never satisfy us. So we kind of, quoting the lamas say, we want happiness, but we run away from it. And we run towards suffering. So look, I thought I'll do a little, the fourth noble truth, is the truth of the path. So that's kind of what we do here. We study the path, we study our minds. The Dalai Lama refers to this as a science. It's not a religion, it's more of a science, because it's really good psychology and it's very analytical, and you can question everything. And something that's not working for you, he says, throw it away. But question everything, question your teachers, and be very careful about your teachers, because there's a lot of dodgy stuff going on. People, a great way to make money is to start a cult, because people are very vulnerable. We're all vulnerable, and we want someone to tell us that things will be better. And people pay a lot of money. And so you have to be very careful about who you learn from and what you're learning, and question it. And if it doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel right, and acknowledge that. So His Holiness says that it's a very analytical system. So the path is you study it. You study the text, you study the philosophy, you listen to people talking, you do some meditation. They say it's the three trainings: morality, concentration and wisdom. So I'll talk a bit about how to deal with some of these negative emotions, and then in the end we'll talk about emptiness, which is the absolute way to deal with negative emotions. Okay, I'll do this little meditation to start to sort of settle our minds. So, just for those who haven't really done this before, you try and keep the spine straight. It's like you're being hooked and drawn up, so that your energy can travel. You have a psychic nervous system that follows the physical nervous system. So wherever you put your mind, your energy goes there, and you have what they call a central channel, and that if that's blocked, which it is if you're slouching, it's not as easy to meditate. It kind of clears your mind when you sit up straight. So just gently close your eyes and bring the mind inward. Relax the shoulders, tilt the head slightly forward. And the eyes slightly open, just letting in a bit of light so you don't doze off. And the left hand down and the right on top. It doesn't matter, you can put your hands anywhere, but the Tibetans tend to do this. It's sort of, I think the thumbs touching is an energy thing as well. So just focusing on your breathing. This is a slightly different breathing meditation as well. So begin by breathing in deeply through the nostrils, bringing the air down to the stomach, holding it for a moment, and then exhaling slowly and gently through your pursed lips. Repeat this 2 more times. And then breathe normally in and out through your nose. Observe your breathing without thinking, without conceptualizing. Just the coming and going of the breath, the flowing in and flowing out. Letting go of any thoughts, just bring your mind back to the breath. Now turn your attention to the clarity of your consciousness. Your consciousness or mind is whatever you are experiencing at the moment. Sensations in your body, thoughts, feelings, perceptions and sounds, and so forth. The nature of each of these experiences is clarity, without form or colour, space-like, pure awareness. Focus your attention on the clear, pure nature of your mind. This might be difficult to find the actual object, that is the clarity. So meditate on a mental image of clarity. One way to generate such an image is to visualize space. Imagine you are lying on a hilltop, staring up at a sky that is completely clear and free of clouds. Concentrate on this vast, unobstructed emptiness. Imagine that it flows down and embraces you and your surroundings. Everything becomes empty like space. Hold this experience and feel that the nature of your mind is like this clear, empty space. Thoughts and distractions will arise, but don't react to them. Neither follow them nor reject them. Remember that they are clear by nature, without substance. Simply watch them come and go. And then return to the awareness of the mind's clarity. You don't need to think about anything, No need to wonder what. There is no need to wonder what the mind is. Simply observe it. The clear nature, which is like infinite empty space. Concentration means holding the mind on an object continuously without forgetting it. The automatic result of concentration is awareness, which is free of concepts. A light does not need to think, I am dispelling darkness, it simply illuminates. Awareness is an inner light that enables us to see things more clearly. It dispels the heaviness of how things appear to us, thus weakening our clinging or aversion to them. So we'll just dedicate the positive energy of that meditation to the happiness and welfare of everyone. And just gently bring your mind back to the room. So I realised halfway through that I was talking about the three trainings, morality, concentration and wisdom, and lost my... The morality, when we talk about morality or ethical behaviour, it's about non-attachment and non-anger. It's about making good choices that are not just about me. It's about, if you're thinking about others, then you will make ethical choices. And then that sort of helps your mind to gain a certain level of peace because you're not thinking me, and freaking out about everything as much when you're thinking about others. And maybe putting yourself second every now and then and just relaxing a bit. You don't have to have everything, get everything, or be angry at everything all the time. So then when your mind starts to kind of relax a bit, you can concentrate better. And then with your concentration and using awareness, you gain deeper insight into some of these teachings, and then you can sort of you can understand the meaning of reality, which is wisdom, so that you really get a more profound understanding of the nature of reality, and that what we're doing is a misconception. What we're doing is clinging on to something that doesn't exist. And I will get onto that. It's an emptiness is not about things don't exist at all, but the solid, inherent thing that we grasp onto doesn't exist, because everything is changing. And we know that intellectually. We know that with quantum physics. We know that. But our perception is so clouded that we actually grasp onto things. Now, I'll return to that so that, we'll do a meditation on that as well later. But I'll just talk a little bit about, because to be able to actually meditate, you need to kind of gain some level of peace. And in our day-to-day lives, we need to be able to deal with things when they arise. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the philosophy, the thoughts about how to deal with different sorts of delusions. So dealing with attachment, one way is to contemplate the faults of attachment. So like I was saying before, we gloss over, we create a story, we make it fabulous, and then when it's not, it lets us down. so that we need to kind of stop exaggerating so much or getting overexcited. It also, attachment sort of, it really clouds your mind. It clouds your decision making. What did I see the other day? I was walking in the shopping mall and I saw this frock that I liked. And I talked about a frock last week. This is a different one. I thought, oh, that's really cute. And it's a nice summery dress. And I seriously considered buying it. And then I just thought I had other things to do. So I sort of went off and did those. And then I think it was the same day. It's my local shopping centre. I go there all the time. And then I walked past it again. No, it was today I walked past it, had another look at it, and I didn't like it so much. So, you know, in that short space of time where I had all this attachment a couple of days ago for this thing, and I really, you know, if I don't know what distracted me, maybe go and do something else. But that impulse buying, it's very dangerous, and it's a really good indication of our attachment. We see something, we just think it's the best thing we ever saw, and we grab it. And then the next day you think, oh, why did I do that? You know? And I think everybody's been there. So we create this whole story, you know, big sort of, we exaggerate. Yeah. So another thing to do is recall that things are impermanent and they're changing all the time. And it's the same thing, you know, it's if something grows old, fashions change so quickly and grow old and are impermanent. So it's something that, you know, that whether it's cars or people or, you know, cars, my God, you know, you think it's the coolest thing you've ever seen, and then a couple of years later it looks daggy. It just, they're not, you've got to get the next version, and people do update their cars, some people who can afford it. Another way to sort of think about attachment is to meditate on death, and there are actually death meditations, and that's not to kind of freak people out, but and you know, they say, well, Buddhists, they're always talking about suffering and death, but the thing is, if you actually sort of contemplate, and there are meditations, you know, you don't know the time of your death, you don't know, there are many more ways that we can die than ways that we can stay alive, really. There's so many different bad things that can happen, which we're all desperately aware of at the moment. But if you meditate that you know that that's going to happen, and that all of your attachments, your car, your relationships, your friends, your family, nobody can actually come with you. Nobody can actually help you at that time either. And it's, which is sort of quite a scary thought, but if you have peace of mind, and this isn't just about, oh, you know, highfalutin, let's get liberation and enlightenment, but if you actually meditate and learn to do some of these things and develop some peace of mind, you will have a peaceful passing. Your death will be much easier with less attachment. And part of what they talk about is that, you know, all of these people that love you can't help you at that time. And also, if you have a lot of attachment, your mind will be very disturbed because you don't want to leave them, and you have no control over that. And so that can be very difficult for people. And it's just interesting, some people really do pass quite peacefully, and I find that really interesting. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a spiritual, you know, a religion or something, but some people just naturally have less attachment, I suppose, or they're more at peace with themselves. And so, yeah, they say meditate on death. That's a good one. And the best remedy is to think about emptiness, which is what we'll be doing shortly. And it talks about when you have attachment to food. If you think about how the food, where it came from, and how many animals and critters died to bring you food, and it's not just meat, it's like there's a lot of willful killing of insects and with pesticides, and even just if you're an organic gardener, you'll be killing critters and insects to grow your food. So there's kind of no escaping it. Being vegetarian is highly recommended in this tradition as a kind of mental state of not wanting to be involved in killing. But there is still a lot of creatures die to bring us our food. And also you think about the people that farm the food and package the food, and truck drivers transport the food, and shops set it up. So there's an enormous array of people and beings involved in bringing you the food that you eat. And so they say that if you eat mindfully and think about where the food came from, you sort of have more respect for it, and you're less kind of just eating because it tastes good. So I'll talk a little bit about anger. And it's to think about the disadvantages of anger, and then so that you become convinced that it's actually harmful and not helpful. So if you think about the effect of your anger it might have on other people, but also the effect that it has on yourself. You know, when you and I think modern science would say that if you're stressed and angry, and it has a physical effect on your body and can create illnesses. But also you don't feel good when you're angry. It feels pretty revolting, but it's this horrible energy that takes over. And as the Lama's often remind us, we don't look good either when we're angry. People get red in the face and pull faces and yell and carry on. I knew someone years ago who they got angry all the time. They sort of, and they're sort of alienating people, and they just sort of jump and snap at everything and be really angry. And it was like, oh. And then they said to me once, "Oh, it's all right though, because I get over it really quickly." And I didn't have the heart to say anything. It's not like, figure it out sort of thing. But the trail of people that had been lost along the way, and that other people had commented, "My God, that person's really angry, aren't they?" And you keep away from people that are angry all the time. And it's a tricky one, because there are things that we might be right. I have another friend who constantly argues with her extended family about serious issues, which when I reflect back, I sort of think, oh my God, is that what I was like when I was young? Just sort of arguing all the time and getting angry with people for not seeing things the way I saw them, and being really upset, but also thinking, well, I'm right. There are these terrible things going on, and but you just can't yell in people's faces that they have to think the way you do. And I was sort of thinking about it, and she was saying, but what? So I'm just to let it go and let people have these wrong ideas. And she's very good at arguing with me, and I had to think about it. And I just think there are other ways. And I think when I think about Geshe Doga, when I think about the lamas, they just inspire people to be better. And I think that's what you have to do. I think you have to live and be better in yourself, and people notice, and they will then maybe show you more respect. But at least, I mean, that's the way people learn things anyway. They get inspired by something or someone, and it's not necessarily going to be you, but by you living an ethical life and taking care of your mind and not getting angry, because nobody's, from my own experience, having heated arguments with someone about politics and religion, like that endless kind of, you can't win, because people believe what they want to believe, and they have to kind of make their own choices. And I think in the end it does come down to, you have to take care of your own mind. And there's a quote in, one of the great thinkers in this tradition is called Shantideva, and he wrote a Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And Bodhisattva is a person that is on this path training to try and be better. And one of the lovely things in it is that to try to cover the whole world in leather would be impossible. But if you put leather on the bottom of your shoes, wherever you go will be covered with leather. So it is about, do you get it? It makes a lot of sense, I think. And personally, I find it has worked a bit for me in my life with my family. So years ago, my father said to me, because I grew up Catholic, and he's very strict Catholic, and he came and visited here once and said to me, "But where is the God?" But he said to me, "Whatever it is you're doing, Clare, keep doing it." So it was, my whole family kind of noticed that there's something different, and I get along really well with them now, even though they're still it's but yeah. So what else? So thinking about the other person as well, when someone's being really horrible, like they might be being really inappropriate or actually quite aggressive or undermining or rude or whatever, and you're really challenged. If you put yourself in their shoes, and that's a saying, put yourself in someone else's shoes. If you think about this situation, sometimes someone is coming from a place of great hurt themselves, or if you learn about their kind of background, what's driving them, it actually helps you to develop some compassion for them and not be angry at them. And you sort of understand why they may have these. Their views might be completely deluded, they're really wrong, but you can sort of try and understand where they're coming from. And by showing them some compassion, I think it can be quite surprising, the effect that can have on people. I work with young children, so with teenagers, and I put up with a lot of behaviour that I wouldn't put up with from friends or family or anything. But a lot of really terrible views from some kids, and they might be racist or sexist or just bullies or all sorts of things. But by showing them kindness, not yelling at them, actually showing them some understanding and having kind of vaguely rational discussions about things actually goes a long way. And quite often when a kid behaves really badly, they're expecting you to yell, to get upset, to get angry because it's what they're used to. And it really takes them by surprise when you're kind to them. And they feel safe. And that's the other thing, and I think that people feel much safer around you, and then they might be more willing to have those conversations that we just kind of like angry conversations. So we need to move on. But all of these things, when you're talking about depression or fear or anger or attachment, always the best advice is to practice the meditations on emptiness. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll do a meditation. So this concept of emptiness, some of you will have heard it before, some it's new to you. It's not, and emptiness makes it sound like there's a nothingness, and it's not nothingness. It's this what they refer to as the lack of solid inherent existence. So, and as I said, all of our problems arise from this, what they call ignorance. We're clouded. We have this sort of deep psychological attitude to things that is very, very hard to shift, but it can be kind of loosened with meditation, when we're thinking and contemplation. And so one of the examples that they often use when we're talking about this is to talk about something like a table. And I remember this kind of did my head in when I first kind of heard about it, but you just have to kind of think about it over and over and over again, read about it, think about it, and it starts to kind of make sense. And on an intellectual level, it really does, we do understand this, but on our sort of surface level, we don't. And so we need to go beyond the surface of how things appear. So when we're talking about the table, if I got a hammer and I sort of knocked it apart and put all of the pieces on the floor over there, is it still a table? It can't function as a table. It's not a table, it's just pieces of wood with red paint on them. And we put them together in this configuration and we can put stuff on it, and then we call that table. So when we search for the table, there is no inherently existing table. We see it as this solid thing that is a table, but when we search for it, we can't find it. So you sort of go, right, well, is it in the wood? Now, if it was in these pieces of wood, it would have always been in the pieces of wood. With the pieces of wood themselves, the top of the table, the sides of the table, there's a little bench here. In themselves, you can't find either, because these, when you look for them, you sort of realise, well, they were part of a tree. Somebody's got these bits of wood, and it used to be a tree. So it is a tree or a table. And so now we're calling these bits of wood. They're not just bits of wood; they're the side of a table. So there's lots of different ways that you can sort of look at this thing. And the paint is it the paint because it's a red table. So you sort of scrape away. If you scrape away the paint, then it's no longer a red table, but it's still what we call a table. So, and then you can sort of break it down into its atoms and its sort of chemical parts. So which part of it is exactly the table? Thich Nhat Hanh does this beautiful meditation where you think about the trees and the forest, and that the water and the sun that grew the trees, and the nutrients that grew the trees, and then the people that came along and felled the tree and then, turned it into pieces of wood and sold the wood, and then Damien made the table out of it. So that all of these pieces of wood, Thich Nhat Hanh says you've got the sun and the moon, you've got the rain and the sun and everything in here existing that cause the existence of this table. So when you actually look at it, is the top the table, is the sides the table, is the whole thing the table? So if I take part of it away, then it's no longer a table. So you can't find a thing that you actually call a table. And we do this with ourselves. There's an analysis where you analyse the self. And I think that's what we're going to do now. Maybe do it soon, because we're running out of time. So that you search for this inherently existing self. So, it's this lump of flesh and bones, and blood and pus, and a mental consciousness, and it's called Clare. So, where is the inherently existing Clare? It's just a name that's put onto this. And one of the ways that they say is if I was inherently existing Clare and I walked out onto the Nepean Highway, everyone would go, "Oh, there's Clare." So, that's a pretty easy one, I think, because our parents just gave us a name. When we were born, we didn't have a name. I wasn't Clare when I was born. It took them a while, and then they decided, and they just put a name over it. And that's really how things exist. You just sort of look at all of this, and you say, "Oh, that's Clare." But what you're referring to is a label that's on all of this, and that they say that's how, and this is constantly changing. My mind is constantly changing. When we say that person made me angry, I am angry, well, then am I saying I am angry? So this is angry. So which part is angry? My leg's angry? Am I, it's sort of, where does the anger exist? So it's another way of dealing with your anger, is actually searching for it. Where exactly does it exist? And if you say it exists in your mind, then which moment of mind? And you say, well, the present moment, but the present moment is actually moving from the past to the present, to the, and then the future is the present moment. So the next moment when someone cracks a joke and I'm not angry, then I'm not angry. So which moment? You can't actually point to a specific moment of mind either that is angry. It's just a series of moments that are constantly in flux and changing as well. So all of those feelings and thoughts, like with the clarity of the mind, they're just sort of passing and changing. And you can't solidly say, I am this or I am that. Or else you would be that forever if it existed inherently. So when we see this, it sort of loosens, it starts to loosen the grip a little bit. Anyway, and the way to really understand is in meditation. So that's when you do, contemplation and meditation and wisdom. So we've been contemplating, we've been thinking about all these things. I've been talking probably too much, but we'll do the meditation now. And this is by really focusing in on this, it kind of helps you to understand it a bit more deeply. I'm sorry, but we'll probably go a bit over time. If you need to leave, that's perfectly fine. So again, just bring your mind inwards, gently closing your eyes. Relax your jaw, relax your shoulders, focusing on the breath for a moment. Just following the in-breath and the out-breath. Just letting go and coming back to that clarity of mind. And we'll motivate strongly to do this meditation in order to finally become enlightened for the sake of all beings. Now, with the alertness of a spy, slowly and carefully become aware of the I. Who or what is it that thinks, feels, and meditates? How does it appear to you? Is your I a creation of your mind? Or is it something that exists concretely and independently in its own right? Now try to locate it. Where is this I? Is it in your head? In your eyes? In your heart? In your hands? In your stomach? In your feet? Carefully consider each part of your body, including the organs, blood vessels and nerves. Can you find your I? It might be very small and subtle, so consider the cells, the atoms, the subatomic particles. If you do think that your I is part of the body, then what would happen if that part were removed in an operation or damaged in an accident? And what happens to the I when your body ceases to function at death? Perhaps you think your mind is the I. The mind is a constantly changing stream of thoughts, feelings, and other experiences coming and going in rapid succession. It's never the same from one moment to the next. Which of these experiences is the I? Is it a loving thought, an angry thought, a happy feeling, a depressed feeling? If you think that your I is one of these experiences, then what happens to it when that kind of experience is not present in your mind? If your I is love, for example, then when your mind is filled only with anger, does the I go somewhere else or disappear altogether? Is there no I at that time? Or maybe you have many I's, an angry one, a loving one, a frightened one, etc. If you cannot find the I in the body or your mind, then could it be something else? Is there some extra part of you other than your body and mind? After all, we say my body and my mind, implying the existence of something else that owns these two. If so, what is it? Where is it found? What kind of phenomena is it? Examine every possibility you can think of. Again, look at the way your I continually actually appears, how it feels to you. After this, search for the I. Do you notice any change? Do you still believe that it is as solid and real as you felt before? Does it still appear to exist independently in and of itself. Next, mentally disintegrate your body. Imagine all the atoms separating and floating apart. Billions and billions of minute particles scatter throughout space. Imagine that you can actually see this. Now disintegrate your mind. Let every thought, feeling, sensation, or perception float away. Then check your feeling of I. Where is it? What is it? Do not make the mistake of thinking my body is not the I and my mind is not the I, therefore I don't exist. You do exist, but not in the way that you instinctively feel, as something independent and inherent. Conventionally, yourself exists in dependence upon mind and body. And this combination is the basis to which conceptual thinking ascribes the name I, or self, or Mary, or Harold. This is the you that is sitting and meditating and wondering, do I exist? Whatever exists is necessarily dependent upon causes and conditions, or parts and names for its existence. A car, for example, is a collection of pieces of steel, glass, plastic, rubber, an engine, etc., put together by people in a factory. We give them the name a car to this collection. But if we look for a real, concrete, independent, existing car, it cannot be found. So conventionally, things exist dependently, and understanding dependence is the principal cause for understanding their ultimate nature, emptiness. The conventional nature of an object is its dependence upon other things, and its ultimate nature is its emptiness of inherent independent existence. Think about how your body exists conventionally in dependence upon skin, blood, bones, legs, arms, organs, and so forth. In turn, each of these exists in dependence upon their own parts, cells, atoms, and subatomic particles. Think about your mind, how it exists in dependence upon thoughts, feelings, perceptions, sensations, and how in turn each of these exists in dependence upon the previous conscious experiences that gave rise to it. Now go back to your feeling of self or I. Think about how you exist conventionally in dependence upon mind and body and name, the self's parts. When the body feels hungry or cold, for example, you think, I am hungry, I am cold. When the mind has an idea about something, you say, I think. When you feel love for someone, you say, I love you. When introducing yourself, you say, I am so-and-so. Apart from this sense of I that depends upon the ever-flowing, ever-changing streams of body and mind, is there an I that is solid, unchanging, and independent? The mere absence of such an inherently existing I is the emptiness of the self. So we'll finish the session with a conclusion as to how you yourself exists. Conclude by dedicating sincerely any positive energy and insight you have gained to the enlightenment of all beings. Think that this meditation is just one step along the path to finally achieving the direct insight into emptiness, and thus cutting the root of suffering and dissatisfaction. Okay. So just coming back to the room. Are there any questions? So, which model? I don't know that much about them. I saw a thing. I don't do Facebook or anything like that, but I've got this feed that just shows up on my phone. It's news, and someone attacked a Tesla in a car park. Like there's sort of really anti-Tesla movement, so like the anti-climate change people or something. I don't know. And these young dudes, but apparently they've got a lock, so that when you're charging it, it's sort of all locked in, and they couldn't damage it, so they kind of kicked the car and then set the alarm off and then ran away. But yeah, no, I don't know. They're pretty cool looking cars too. So any thoughts? Burning questions? Sometimes people come up afterwards and I think, oh, you should have said that. It's good for other people to hear. Yes?
It claims that it's much easier to put leather on your feet as like an analogy.
Sorry.
Put leather on your feet.
Oh, yes. Yes, yeah.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah.
In terms of how it's used?
Yep. Just for the... Okay, I'll just say that the girl is asking about the leather on the feet, Shanti David's comments. It's... When you meditate and sort of learn some of this and you feel like you understand, yes, anger is not good for me, and you become a bit less angry, and attachment's not good for me, you get less excited about having things and attached to things, you actually enjoy things a lot more. It doesn't mean don't have things, and doesn't mean don't have, people and things in your life, but it means just don't be attached to them. Don't cry when you lose them. It's just enjoy them while they're there, and that's fine. But it's about the clinging attachment that causes the problem. So in them of themselves, attachment and anger aren't necessarily, but it's what we do when we act on them that causes us the problem. And usually we're out of control. It's, attachment is a very excited, agitated state of mind, and anger is an agitated state of mind. Depression is a kind of overwhelming state of mind. All of these things are unstable states of mind. So when we sort of learn a bit about them and how they're just sort of based on a misconception in the first place, and let it go. So you learn a bit more about how to let it go. You get more peaceful and happy within yourself, and the world around you is coloured differently. It actually, when you're angry, they say that you see black. The world can look very black, and there's a lot for us to feel very black about. There's out there in the world. There's so much stuff to upset us. But if you are doing these practices and sort of letting go of all of that, even the feelings that we have about the environment and stuff that overwhelm us and disturb us, that in itself is a form of self-cherishing. It's about sort of letting go of that as well, and then you're probably more enabled to act on it. You're not crippled by your overwhelming feelings. You actually you don't get compassion burnout, which they talk about people that work in the in the UN in sad places. you'd be less likely for that to happen, and you're more energised and able to help. And the strange thing about helping, no, not the strange thing, but the reality is that in helping, you get happier, and the world actually becomes an easier place and a happier place. And in fact, like I said, you might even inspire other people and help other people to become happy. So you're actually, in that way, you know, making the world a better place, rather than getting angry at it and saying somebody do something about it. Or, you know, does that make sense? Yeah, good. And I think things can literally get better for you as well. Like, you know, there might be some problem and you're doing the meditations that are working on it, and then it can just sort of change. And I think sometimes your meditation can have that power. I wouldn't have the expectation of that. I think what happens, more realistically what happens is your mind changes, your perspective changes, so that even if the problem still exists, it's not freaking you out as much. You're actually able to kind of live with it and deal with it and work with it, and you're less attached to it. So that, again, your world becomes better. And you do have an impact on other people. And it's very, you know, in my work with kids, it's quite striking what a difference it makes. And every now and then I do skits it and get really, you know, like, and I can feel the anger rising and I act on it and I regret it every time, absolutely regret it. And because I don't do it very often, I think it's even more frightening for the kids when it happens. But especially if they're being dangerous, we work with tools a lot, I do a lot of horticulture, and if something dangerous is happening and some kid's being completely nuts, and I've told them, and then then I lose it. And I will always apologise. I'll go back and apologise. And that confuses the hell out of them too, that you'll sort of but yeah, I really, really don't like it, and it's never helpful. You know, can always... Okay. Oh, yes, sorry.
So you talk about happiness and the Four Noble Truths.
Mm.
So is the attachment that you're talking about the same attachment that occurs when somebody loses something? So, for example, the death of someone.
Mm.
Is that the attachment, same form of attachment, or is that, have you dealt with any different sort of way?
Look, I'd say... Oh, yes, sorry. The gentleman's asking, is the attachment when you lose someone to death, is that attachment the same sort of attachment? And Buddhism would say, yes, it is the same sort of attachment. And that... what can I say? It's emptiness is the answer to everything. I think in those times there are also, like on Wednesday night we're doing the Tara practices, green Tara meditation. There are meditations that you can do that can actually ease your mind in the depths of those sort of terrible, when things like that happen, and can actually give you some sort of peace of mind. But it's because we're clinging on so desperately to that's our happiness, and love is often is usually mixed with some attachment. The definition of love is wishing the other to be happy, so that everything that you do is in order that they're happy, no matter what happens. And so normally we think, I love you because you make me happy. That's our definition of love. If someone makes us happy, we think we have to have them, and that's why we love them. And then that's a form of attachment because it's involving a self-cherishing mind. But death is just such a difficult thing for people to have to deal with and go through it. And I think the meditations help. That's all I can say, is that when you're thinking less about the solidity and the inherent existence of people, and also if you have helped that person to have a good, an easy passing, or done whatever you can, I think that helps lessen the grasping as well. I think when you're really thinking of them, and that can mean all sorts of things. I think people deal with death differently, and everyone has to be allowed to deal with it their own way. But sincerely, these meditations can actually prepare or retrospectively help with the pain. And we're in pain. Buddhism would say we're in pain and we're suffering because of our grasping, our clinging. And you can also do meditations and prayers for the person that has died or is dying. And I think that actually empowers you some way, because it's the most helpless feeling to have to go through, because there is no control, there's nothing you can do about it. But by doing the meditations, you can actually kind of feel that there's something that you are offering, something that you can do, something that's helping. And I think part of it is it's projecting. It's like when you make you're about to ring someone and the phone rings and it's them on the other end. They've rung you. In that telepathic kind of connection that we have sometimes with people. I think everyone's probably had that experience. It's just when you're thinking of someone and then they ring. And so I think that there is power in prayer. I think that there is power in the meditations that you can dedicate for somebody, that energy for them. But also what it does is it actually eases your own mind. So I don't know. Somebody's phone? Okay. Yes, I've kept you long enough. There's a cup of tea and cake in the dining room.